Death was just one misstep away as Samuel Morgan urged his stallion across the treacherous ice ravine. The burning in his left leg, where a Confederate bullet still lodged from Antietam, a distant concern compared to the immediate danger. The howling Wyoming blizzard of 1875 had already claimed weaker men, but Samuel couldn't afford to become another casualty, not with a dozen cattle trapped on the ridge ahead, and certainly not with the legacy his father had entrusted to him. "Hold steady, Thunder," he commanded, his voice barely audible above the wind. The stallion's muscles tensed beneath him as they navigated the narrow path, one hoof slipping dangerously close to the edge before finding purchase again. Samuel had survived worse. The blood-soaked fields of Antietam, where he'd watched his best friend die in his arms, the summer drought that killed half his herd in '69, and the soul-crushing loneliness of the decade since his father passed. But this Wyoming winter seemed determined to break what remained of his spirit. When the dark shapes of the cattle finally appeared through the swirling white, Samuel's experienced eye knew they were close to surrendering to the cold. Working methodically despite his numbing fingers, he used his lariat to guide them one by one down the safer path he'd scouted. With each rescued animal, the memories flashed. His father's voice teaching him the same technique that had saved his unit during a surprise Confederate ambush. It was well past nightfall when he finally rode into the yard of Rockingham Ranch. The warm glow from the cabin windows was a welcome sight, and inside, his foreman Jim waited with hot coffee and unwelcome news. "Telegram came for you," Jim said, pushing the yellow paper across the rough-hewn table. "From Boston." Samuel's eyes narrowed as he read, "Margaret Wells, arriving on Thursday's stage." The woman who'd answered his advertisement 3 months ago. An advertisement he'd placed in a moment of weakness after drinking too much whiskey on the anniversary of his father's death. "She's still coming then," he said, voice flat as he folded the telegram and tucked it in his shirt pocket. "You gonna meet her?" Jim asked. Samuel stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his steel-gray eyes. "Guess I'll have to." Later that night, alone in his room, Samuel's hand instinctively went to his leg as the phantom pain returned. He reached for the worn leather journal on his nightstand and wrote a single line. "Boston woman coming. Don't know what's worse, that she might actually arrive, or that I'm hoping she will." Margaret Wells stared out the stagecoach window at the endless expanse of Wyoming territory, so different from the crowded streets of Boston she left behind. At 32, she'd made the most daring decision of her life, to become a mail-order bride to a rancher she knew only through a handful of exchanged letters. Life with her cousin Charlotte had become unbearable after the influenza took her parents. Working as a bookkeeper at Franklin's Mercantile had provided independence but no future. When Samuel Morgan's advertisement appeared in the newspaper, "Rancher seeks educated woman of good character for marriage. Must be practical and willing to embrace frontier life." Something in his straightforward words had called to her. But now as the stagecoach rattled toward Clearwater, doubt gnawed at her. What if he found her lacking? What if frontier life proved too harsh? What if... Her thoughts scattered as the stagecoach lurched violently, followed by a crack and the driver's curse. The vehicle tilted dangerously to one side before grinding to a halt. "Wheels broken, folks," the driver called back. "We're stuck here a while." The other passengers, a traveling salesman and an older couple, groaned in unison. Margaret stepped carefully down from the coach, stretching her cramped legs. They had stopped beside a small creek, the afternoon sun gleaming on the water. In the distance, mountains rose against the sky, majestic and intimidating. The crack of a twig made her turn. A tall man on horseback emerged from the trees, leading a second horse laden with supplies. His broad shoulders and strong jawline were partially shadowed by a worn Stetson, but there was no hiding the intensity of his gray-blue eyes as they fixed on her. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat, Didn't expect to find anyone out here? The stagecoach broke down, Margaret explained, gesturing toward the road where the driver was examining the damaged wheel. We're delayed. The stranger dismounted with the easy grace of a man accustomed to life in the saddle. Samuel Morgan, he introduced himself. My ranch is about 5 miles south. Margaret felt her heart quicken. Margaret Wells, she replied with a small nod. I believe I was on my way to meet you, Mr. Morgan. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something unreadable. Miss Wells, didn't expect you until Thursday. The earlier stage had space, she said, suddenly self-conscious of her travel-worn appearance. I sent a telegram. Been tracking cattle in the blizzard for 2 days, he explained. Haven't been to town. His eyes assessed her in a single sweep, taking in her city clothes and slender frame. You're a long way from Boston. Before she could respond, the stagecoach driver approached. Be at least 3 hours before we're moving again, miss, he said apologetically. Sent my boy to town for parts. Samuel shifted his weight, looking between Margaret and the disabled stagecoach. I can take you to Clearwater if you'd like, he offered, his tone neutral, or straight to the ranch. Margaret hesitated. Propriety suggested she should wait with the other passengers, but something in Samuel's steady gaze made her decision for her. I'd appreciate a ride to town, Mr. Morgan, she said. I should speak with Mr. Peterson first. Samuel's expression hardened instantly. James Peterson? The merchant? Yes, he arranged this meeting. Margaret chose her words carefully. As the intermediary. Samuel's jaw tightened as he helped her onto his second horse. Peterson's been trying to buy my water rights for years, he said flatly. Didn't know he was in the matchmaking business now. The ride to Clearwater was mostly silent, with Samuel pointing out landmarks occasionally, the boundaries of his property, the creek that supplied water to his irrigation system, the distant hills where his cattle grazed in summer. Margaret found herself studying his profile when he wasn't looking. The lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun, the small scar that ran along his jawline, the set of his shoulders that suggested both strength and the weight of responsibility. As they crested a hill, the small town of Clearwater came into view. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above them. Samuel guided his horse down the slope. Peterson's store is the big one on the corner, he said. Thompson's hotel next to it is decent if you need a place to stay. As they reached the main street, heads turned to watch them pass. Samuel ignored the curious stares, but Margaret felt them like physical touches, the newest object of interest in a place where strangers were rare. Outside Peterson's general store, Samuel helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure around her waist. For a brief moment, they stood close enough that she could smell leather and wood smoke on his clothes. Thank you for the ride, Mr. Morgan, she said, stepping back. He nodded once. I'll be at the blacksmith's, he said. Find me there when you're done with Peterson. The bell above the door jingled as Margaret entered the store. Behind the counter, a portly man with thinning hair and an expensive waistcoat looked up, his smile widening as he took in her appearance. Miss Wells, I presume? James Peterson, at your service. He hurried around the counter to shake her hand. We weren't expecting you until Thursday, but what a pleasant surprise. Margaret forced a smile. The earlier stage had room, she explained for the second time that day. Well, well. Come into my office, please. We have matters to discuss before I take you out to meet your intended. Peterson's office was cluttered but well-appointed, with a large desk and leather chairs. He gestured for her to sit, then settled behind the desk, folding his hands on the polished surface. Now, Miss Wells, I must ask, what is the amount of your dowry? Mr. Harrington is quite particular about such matters. Margaret blinked in confusion. Mr. Harrington, I'm here to meet Samuel Morgan. Peterson's smile faltered. There must be some mistake. My arrangement was with Mr. Harrington, who placed an advertisement for a bride with a substantial dowry to help finance his new cattle operation. I answered Mr. Morgan's advertisement, Margaret said firmly. I have his letters. She reached into her handbag and produced the carefully preserved correspondence. Peterson scanned the letters, his frown deepening. I see. It seems there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Morgan did place an advertisement some months ago, but I didn't handle that arrangement. He cleared his throat. In any case, may I ask about your dowry? Margaret stiffened. I have no dowry, Mr. Peterson. I was under the impression that wasn't a requirement. Peterson's expression shifted from confusion to dismissal so quickly that Margaret felt as if she'd been slapped. No dowry at all? That won't do for any of the eligible men in these parts. They need wives who can contribute financially. Land needs investment to yield profit, Miss Wells. As he spoke, Margaret noticed a document on his desk, a map with Rockingham Ranch clearly marked, with red lines drawn through sections of it. She glimpsed the letterhead, Harrison Mining Company, before Peterson casually covered it with another paper. Mr. Morgan mentioned nothing about financial requirements in his letters, Margaret said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. Peterson waved a hand dismissively. Morgan's different, stubborn, refuses to see the opportunities right in front of him. That ranch of his could be 10 times as profitable if he'd sell his water rights to Harrison Mining. He leaned forward. But you'll find frontier life harsh without proper resources, Miss Wells. I'd advise you to return east on the next stage. Margaret rose from her chair, gathering her dignity around her like armor. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Peterson, but I'll discuss this matter directly with Mr. Morgan. Outside, the afternoon had turned cool, the sun slipping toward the western mountains. Margaret stood on the boardwalk for a moment, fighting back angry tears. She'd spent nearly everything she had on the journey west. The prospect of immediate return was not only humiliating, but financially impossible. The rhythmic clanging of hammer on metal led her to the blacksmith shop at the end of the street. Samuel stood inside, deep in conversation with a barrel-chested man as they examined a broken plow blade. He looked up as her shadow fell across the doorway. Miss Wells, he said, excusing himself from the blacksmith. How did your meeting go? Not well, she admitted. It seems Mr. Peterson arranged for a different bride, one with a substantial dowry, for someone named Harrington. Something that might have been relief flickered across Samuel's face. Harrington's ranch borders mine to the east. He's one of Peterson's cronies. He studied her face. So Peterson suggested you go back east. He did, and I saw something else. A map of your ranch on his desk with markings from Harrison Mining Company. Samuel's expression darkened. Harrison's been trying to get my water rights for years. Peterson's likely getting a cut. His jaw tightened. Did Peterson say anything else? That I'd find frontier life harsh without proper resources, Margaret said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. But I can't return east, at least not immediately. I need to find work first. Samuel was silent for a long moment, seeming to weigh something in his mind. Mrs. Thompson at the hotel might need help, he finally said. Or, he hesitated, my housekeeper left to care for her daughter's new baby in Denver. Positions open, if you're interested. Margaret stared at him. You're offering me a job? As your housekeeper? Pays fair. You'd have your own room in the main house. His expression remained unreadable. It's honest work until you decide what you want to do. Pride warred with practicality in Margaret's mind. She'd come to be a wife, not a servant. But the alternative, begging for work in a town where Peterson clearly held influence, was worse. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Morgan, she said carefully. I accept, on a trial basis. Something almost like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Trial basis, he agreed. We can ride out tomorrow morning. Life at Rockingham Ranch quickly settled into a rhythm for Margaret. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Samuel and his three ranch hands, Jim, the weathered foreman, young Mexican-born Miguel, whose skill with horses approached artistry, and Charlie, a laconic Civil War veteran who managed the irrigation systems. Within a week, Margaret had discovered Samuel's leather-bound journal while cleaning his office, a record of 10 years of solitude, struggle, and determination. She didn't read the private entries, but a loose page fell out, revealing a sketch of Samuel and an older man she presumed was his father, standing proudly before a half-built cabin with "Rocking M" scrawled beneath it. When Samuel reluctantly showed her the ranch's account books, Margaret's organizational skills from Franklin's Mercantile proved invaluable. Within days, she created a proper ledger system that revealed both the ranch's potential and its precarious financial position. One afternoon, while exploring the property, Margaret strayed too far from the main house. The weather shifted suddenly, a common occurrence in Wyoming territory, and she found herself disoriented in a small wooded area as fog rolled in. The distant howl of wolves sent a chill down her spine. As she tried to retrace her steps, a massive gray wolf appeared on the path ahead, golden eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. Margaret froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The wolf took a step forward, a low growl rumbling in its throat. The crack of a rifle shot split the air, and the wolf retreated into the underbrush. Samuel emerged from the trees on horseback, rifle in hand. "You're a long way from the house," he said, his voice tight with what Margaret realized was concern, not anger. "I lost track of time," she admitted as he helped her onto his horse, "and direction." "Wyoming can turn deadly quick," Samuel said, settling into the saddle behind her. "Even in fair weather." The closeness of his body against hers, solid and warm, made Margaret acutely aware of how alone they were. For a moment neither spoke, the only sound the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and their own breathing. "Thank you," she said finally, "for coming after me." Samuel's reply was so quiet she almost didn't hear it. "Couldn't lose you too." It was an unseasonably warm spring day, nearly 3 weeks after her arrival, when Margaret heard raised voices from the yard. Through the kitchen window, she saw Samuel standing toe-to-toe with a well-dressed man whose expensive horse suggested he was no ordinary ranch hand. "My answer hasn't changed, Harrison," Samuel was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "The water rights aren't for sale, not at any price." "Don't be a fool, Morgan," the other man replied. "My offer's generous now, but it won't stay that way. That silver won't mine itself, and we need that water. Find another source. This creek's been rocking M water since my father staked his claim. It feeds every irrigation ditch on my property." Harrison's laugh held no humor. "Claims can be challenged. Accidents happen, especially to stubborn men who stand in the way of progress." Margaret saw Samuel's hand drift toward the revolver at his hip. "That sounds like a threat. Harrison, take it however you want. Just know that Harrison Mining Company gets what it wants, one way or another." Harrison mounted his horse. "Think about my offer. I won't make it again." After Harrison rode away, Samuel stood motionless in the yard for a long moment before turning toward the house. His eyes met Margaret's through the window, and she quickly stepped back, embarrassed to be caught eavesdropping. But when he entered the kitchen, his expression wasn't angry. "Heard all that, did you?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I wasn't trying to listen," she began, but he waved away her apology. "Might as well know what you've walked into," he said, leaning against the table. "William Harrison, Jr. His father started with one small silver claim 10 years ago. Now they own half the mines in the territory and want the other half. My creek feeds the best farmland for 50 miles, but it would serve their mining operation better." "Why not sell?" Margaret asked. "If his offer is as generous as he claims." Samuel's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I still hear my father's cough some nights. The consumption that took him came from working in a mine back east. His dying wish was for this land to stay pure. His gaze drifted to the window. This isn't just land to me, it's his redemption. Margaret nodded slowly, understanding flowing between them. And these accidents Harrison mentioned? 3 ranchers who refused to sell have had mysterious fires. Another found his cattle poisoned. Samuel's jaw tightened. I've doubled the night watch on the herd and the irrigation gates. That night, Margaret was awakened by a shout from Samuel's room. She found him sitting upright in bed, eyes wide but unseeing, sweat glistening on his bare chest despite the cool night air. The artillery's coming, he muttered. Get down, Williams. Samuel, Margaret said softly, approaching slowly. You're at Rocking M. You're home. His eyes gradually focused on her face. Margaret. Confusion gave way to embarrassment. I'm sorry. The dreams, they come sometimes. Antietam? She asked, pouring him water from the pitcher on his nightstand. Surprise flickered across his face. How did you know? Your leg, the way you favor it in cold weather. She handed him the water. My father had similar dreams after he returned from the Mexican War. Samuel took a long drink. It was Williams who took the bullet meant for me. I carried him 3 miles to the field hospital, but he trailed off, the memory still raw nearly 15 years later. Margaret sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Is that why you're so determined to save everyone? The cattle in the blizzard, the ranch, even a lost Boston bookkeeper? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Maybe. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. You're observant, Miss Wells. Margaret, she corrected gently. I think after sharing nightmares, we can use first names. Margaret, he agreed, and the way he said it made her heart beat a little faster. Over the next 2 months, Margaret's role at Rocking M evolved far beyond housekeeper. She reorganized the ranch's finances, identified areas for improvement, and worked alongside Samuel to implement changes that quickly began to show results. The improved irrigation system increased hay production. The new bull from Laramie promised stronger calves. Samuel even took her advice to diversify by adding a small herd of sheep on the eastern pastures. While cleaning out a storage room, Margaret discovered a dusty wooden box filled with old papers, land deeds, cattle sale records, and letters dating back to when Samuel's father first claimed the land. She set them aside for proper organization. As Rocking M prospered, Harrison Mining's pressure intensified. Twice they found irrigation gates deliberately damaged. A small brush fire started suspiciously close to the western boundary, and rumors circulated in town that Harrison was filing legal challenges to Samuel's water rights. One evening, Margaret overheard a conversation between 2 men behind Peterson's store as she waited for Samuel to finish business at the bank. Harrison's getting impatient, one voice said, Peterson's. Morgan needs more persuasion. My boys can be very persuasive, replied the second voice. We'll start with the old man who manages the water. After we're done with him, Morgan will understand we mean business. Margaret's blood ran cold. She hurried to find Samuel, but he'd already left for the ranch. By the time she hired a horse from the livery stable and rode back to Rocking M, the sun was setting. She arrived too late. A violent thunderstorm had swept through the valley, and when she reached the ranch, Samuel and the men had just returned, soaked and grim-faced. Jim and Miguel supported Charlie between them, the older man's face gray with pain. What happened? Margaret gasped, holding the door wide. Harrison's men, Samuel said grimly, ambushed Charlie while he was checking the north dam, beat him badly before Jim and Miguel heard his shouts. They carried Charlie to his room in the bunkhouse while Margaret gathered medical supplies. The next hour was spent cleaning and bandaging his injuries, 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and numerous cuts and bruises. Should heal clean, Jim said when they'd finished. But he won't be working for a while. Samuel's expression was thunderous as they walked back to the main house through the rain. "This ends now," he said. "Harrison's gone too far." Inside, Margaret poured them both whiskey, her hands shaking slightly. "I overheard Peterson and someone else in town," she admitted. "They were planning this attack. I tried to get back in time to warn you." Samuel's eyes widened slightly. "You rode back alone? In this weather?" "I had to try," she said simply. He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head in wonder. "You're not what I expected, Margaret Wells." "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied, managing a small smile despite her worry. "Samuel, what will you do now?" "Ride to the county seat tomorrow. File formal charges." He downed his drink in one swallow. "Not that it'll do much good. Harrison owns most of the officials between here and Cheyenne." "There might be another way," Margaret said slowly. "Those old papers I found in the storage room. I've been going through them. Your father sold parcels to 3 different buyers in '66 and '67. One of them was Harrison Sr. Samuel frowned. "I remember. Small piece of the northeast corner. Wasn't worth much then. The borders described in that sale don't match what Harrison Jr. is claiming now," Margaret explained. "According to the original document, the creek headwaters were explicitly excluded from the sale. I made a copy." She retrieved a folded paper from the desk drawer. This could challenge his legal claim to the water rights. Samuel studied the document, amazement dawning on his face. "Margaret, this could change everything." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with new respect. "How did you find this?" "I'm good with numbers and details," she said simply. "It's why Franklin's hired me in Boston." Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. "You're extraordinary." The touch of his calloused fingers against hers sent warmth spreading through her body. For a moment, they remained frozen, the storm forgotten as something unspoken passed between them. Samuel leaned forward slightly, his eyes dropping to her lips. A crash of thunder directly overhead broke the spell. Samuel cleared his throat and withdrew his hand. "We should get some rest," he said, his voice rough. "Tomorrow will be a long day." The confrontation came sooner than expected. Before dawn, Miguel burst into the house, his eyes wide with alarm. "Senor Morgan! The creek, it's flooding! Someone blew up the main dam!" Samuel was on his feet instantly, grabbing his hat and revolver. "Wake Jim! Margaret, stay here where it's safe." But Margaret was already pulling on boots. "I can help," she insisted. "You need every hand." There was no time to argue. They raced to the north pasture, where muddy water was already sweeping across the newly planted hayfields. The irrigation channels, overwhelmed by the sudden surge, were overflowing their banks. "We need to divert it," Samuel shouted over the roar of water, "or we'll lose the whole crop and maybe the lower pasture too." For hours they worked frantically, piling sandbags, digging emergency channels, moving livestock to higher ground. Margaret worked alongside the men, her skirts mud-heavy, her arms aching. By mid-morning, they'd managed to redirect the worst of the flood toward a natural gully, saving most of the crops and pastures. They were securing the last diversion when a group of riders appeared on the ridge above them. William Harrison Jr. led them, flanked by 6 rough-looking men. "Terrible accident with that dam, Morgan," Harrison called down, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "Lucky no one was hurt, this time." Samuel's hand moved to his revolver, but Jim caught his arm. "6 against 3, he muttered. "Bad odds." "Maybe you should reconsider my offer," Harrison continued, "before more accidents happen." Margaret, seeing the fury in Samuel's eyes and fearing what might happen next, stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison," she called clearly, "perhaps you'd like to explain these discrepancies in your deed?" She held up the copy of the original sale document. "This clearly shows the creek headwaters were never part of the land your father purchased. Any claim to the contrary would constitute fraud, a federal offense, I believe." Harrison's smug expression faltered. "What document?" What is she talking about, Morgan? The original deed of sale, Samuel said, catching on quickly. Filed with the Territorial Land Office and the county clerk. Copies have been sent to the governor's office as well. This last part was a bluff, but Harrison couldn't know that. He scowled, looking less certain now. This is nonsense. My lawyers would be very interested to see the evidence of tampering with the dam, Margaret interrupted. Destruction of property is a serious crime, Mr. Harrison, as is assault on Mr. Evans yesterday. Harrison's face darkened. You can't prove anything. The dynamite you used has a maker's mark, Samuel improvised. Same as the supplies your mining operation uses. And 3 witnesses saw your men near the dam yesterday evening. For a tense moment, Harrison seemed to weigh his options. Finally, he jerked his horse's head around. This isn't over, Morgan, he spat, then led his men away at a gallop. When they were out of sight, Jim let out a low whistle. That was some quick thinking, Miss Wells. Samuel turned to Margaret, his expression a mixture of admiration and something deeper. You were magnificent, he said softly. Margaret smiled, suddenly aware of her bedraggled appearance. Soaked to the skin, covered in mud, hair escaping its pins. Hardly how a proper Boston lady should look, she said, attempting to lighten the moment. No, Samuel agreed, his eyes never leaving her face. Much better. That night, after they'd cleaned up and changed into dry clothes, Samuel found Margaret on the porch, staring at the stars now visible in the cleared sky. I've been thinking, he said, leaning against the railing beside her. You've done more for this ranch in 2 months than I managed in years. That's not true, Margaret protested. You've kept it running through drought and blizzards and everything in between. Surviving isn't the same as thriving, Samuel said quietly. After my father died, I just existed. Kept things going because I didn't know what else to do. He turned to face her. Until you arrived. Margaret's heart quickened. Samuel, I'm not asking anything of you, he said quickly. You came here expecting one life and found another. I just want you to know that whatever you decide to do, stay, go back east, move to town, you've already changed this place. Changed me. Margaret studied his face in the moonlight, the strength, the vulnerability, the hope he was trying to hide. I'm not going anywhere, she said softly. Not unless you want me to. Samuel's smile, rare and genuine, transformed his weathered face. Then we'll face Harrison together. The weeks following the flood brought significant changes to Rockingham. With the document Margaret had discovered, Samuel was able to secure legal confirmation of his water rights. Harrison, facing scrutiny from territorial officials who weren't in his pocket, backed off his aggressive tactics, though his resentment was clear whenever they encountered him in town. The ranch, despite the damage from the flood, was thriving. Samuel implemented more of Margaret's suggestions, and the summer cattle sale brought the highest profits the ranch had seen since his father's time. But the most profound change was in the relationship between Samuel and Margaret. The pretense of employer and housekeeper had given way to something that looked very much like partnership. They worked side by side during the day and spent evenings on the porch, talking long after sunset. Occasionally, their hands would touch, or their eyes would meet and hold for a moment too long, but neither seemed ready to acknowledge what was growing between them. It was Charlie, recovered enough to resume light duties, who finally broke the stalemate. Boss, he said one evening as they sat outside the bunkhouse, don't mean to speak out of turn, but are you planning to marry that woman or just moon over her till winter? Samuel nearly choked on his coffee. I don't know what you're talking about, Charlie snorted. Sure you don't, just like you don't find excuses to be wherever she is. Just like you didn't ride all the way to Laramie to find those books she mentioned. Just like you haven't smiled more in the last 3 months than in the 5 years before she came. Samuel was silent for a long moment. She came here to be a wife, not a housekeeper, he finally said. And I'm not the man she was expecting to marry. Maybe not, Charlie agreed. But you might be the man she needs. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. And she might be what you need too. Some wounds don't heal with time, Sam. They heal with love. The next morning, Samuel rode into Clearwater alone, returning late in the afternoon with a small package that he tucked carefully into his coat pocket. He found Margaret in the garden, harvesting late summer vegetables. Need to show you something, he said without preamble. Can you ride out with me for a bit? Curious, Margaret set aside her basket and followed him to the stable, where two horses were already saddled. They rode in companionable silence until they reached a gentle rise overlooking the valley. The afternoon sun gilded the creek that wound through the ranch's heart, the pastures where cattle grazed, and the distant mountains beyond. Samuel dismounted and helped Margaret down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "What do you see?" he asked, gesturing toward the view. Margaret considered the question. "I see Rocking M," she said. "I see what you and your father built, what you fought to protect." Samuel nodded. "For years, that's all I saw, too. Land to work, his legacy to preserve." He turned to face her. "But lately, I've started to see something else. A future, not just a past." The intensity in his eyes made Margaret's heart race. "Samuel, I'm not good with words," he continued. "Never have been. But I need to say this." He took a deep breath. "You came here expecting one life and found another. You've changed this ranch, changed me, made me see possibilities I'd forgotten existed." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I'm not James Peterson's idea of a suitable match. No fancy house in town, no easy life. Just hard work, open skies, and a man who's only now realizing what he's been missing." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as he opened the box, revealing a simple gold band. "Samuel Morgan, are you proposing?" "Doing a poor job of it, but yes." A rare smile softened his weathered face. "Margaret Wells, would you consider becoming my partner in all things? Not just ranch business?" Margaret looked from the ring to the man holding it, this quiet, honorable man who had offered her a job when she was stranded, who worked tirelessly for what he believed in, who had somehow claimed her heart when she wasn't looking. "I came west seeking security," she said softly, "but I found something far more valuable." She placed her hand in his. "Yes, Samuel, I would be honored to be your wife." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the setting sun cast long shadows across the land that would now be their shared legacy, a legacy built not on what they brought to their union, but on what they had discovered in each other: strength, courage, and a love as enduring as the mountains that witnessed their promise. The wedding took place in early autumn, a simple ceremony in Clearwater's small church. The entire town turned out, curious to see the Boston bookkeeper who had captured Samuel Morgan's heart. Even James Peterson attended, though his congratulations seemed strained, especially when Samuel introduced Margaret as his new business partner, as well as his wife. William Harrison Jr. made a brief, unexpected appearance at the reception, approaching the couple with a tight smile. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "It seems I underestimated both of you." Before leaving, he added, "My offer for water rights stands, Morgan. Think about it." Samuel's arm tightened around Margaret's waist. "Already thought about it, Harrison. Answer's still no." As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Margaret leaned against Samuel's shoulder in the wagon. "He'll never stop trying, will he?" "Probably not," Samuel admitted. "But neither will we." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Together, we're stronger than anything Harrison can throw at us." The years proved him right. 5 years later, Rocking M had grown into one of the most prosperous operations in the territory. The irrigation system Margaret had designed doubled their hay production. The breeding program Samuel established with her financial guidance produced cattle sought after throughout the West. They even opened a small school on the ranch for the children of their growing number of workers. Their own family had grown too. 4-year-old Thomas Morgan had his father's determined jaw and his mother's quick mind, and a second child was on the way. One cold December evening, Samuel sat at his desk, reviewing a letter that had arrived that morning. Margaret entered with coffee and noticed his unusually pensive expression. "What is it?" she asked, setting down the cup. Samuel handed her the letter. "From Peterson. His store's going under. Harrison Mining's bankruptcy took most of his investments with it." Margaret skimmed the letter, a plea for Samuel to consider buying Peterson's store in Clearwater. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "5 years ago, I'd have said he got what he deserved," Samuel admitted. But now, he looked at their son playing on the floor nearby with wooden horses Miguel had carved. A man should have a chance to rebuild, same as anyone. The next day, they rode into town together and found Peterson in his office, a shadow of the confident businessman he'd once been. When Samuel offered to buy the store at a fair price, with the condition that Peterson would stay on to manage it, the older man's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you help me, Morgan? After everything?" Samuel glanced at Margaret before answering. "Because the measure of a man isn't what he owns or what others think of him. It's what he builds and who stands beside him when times get hard." On their 5th anniversary, Samuel presented Margaret with a special gift, the deed to a small silver mine on what had once been Harrison land. "Harrison Mining went bankrupt last year," he explained as she opened the document in surprise. "Overextended themselves, according to the bank. This parcel came up for auction. It's not large, but the assayer says it's a good vein." Margaret laughed in delight. "You bought a silver mine? You, who once said mining was destroying the territory?" Samuel shrugged, a smile playing at his lips. "Thought it was fitting. Harrison lost everything because he couldn't see past silver. We succeeded because we saw the true value in this land, and in each other." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band he'd placed there 5 years before. "No dowry required." "No," Margaret agreed, leaning in to kiss him as their son played nearby and the sun set over the land they both loved. "Just courage, faith, and a willingness to see the real worth of things." In the gathering dusk, Rocking M Ranch stood as testament to their vision. Not just Samuel Morgan's legacy now, but their shared creation, built on mutual respect, combined strength, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected beginning into something as enduring as the frontier itself. Later that night, as Margaret slept beside him, Samuel wrote a final entry in his journal. "My father once told me that a man's true wealth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what would remain if he lost everything else. I understand now what he meant. If every acre of this land washed away tomorrow, I'd still be the richest man in Wyoming territory."